All right. So, welcome everybody to a new event by TechQuartier in partnership with EY, who has recently published a report called Growth by Diversity, German Tech Startups Defy the Pandemic. We have a great lineup today, a really good, what I believe will be a great and very dynamic panel and very energetic discussions. So, we discussed with EY the findings of those reports, and we thought, okay, this is nice, like the report form is great, but how about we, go one step further and give a voice to some of the people that took part in the report itself, and organize an event around the key topic of diversity. This is something at TechQuartier in which we are making active, concrete step to address. As we know now, it's nobody's going to learn about this today, that there is a strong imbalance in terms of gender diversity and female representation in the tech world, in the startup world. So what we wanted to do was look at the data and hear from people who are on the ground and facing such challenges day in, day out, and basically discuss these issues and potential solutions as well, of course. So a little bit on the agenda, and maybe before I introduce myself, I tend to get into it maybe too quickly, but so my name is Hugo Paquin. I am the head of community at TechQuartier. TechQuartier is a startup and innovation hub in Frankfurt, Germany. And we have a community of 400 startups, many corporates as well as universities, and we provide innovation services to the different stakeholders. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce a little bit who is going to join us today. I will go by order that you appear on my screen. So starting from the left side, we have Ruzica, who is the founder of Proptiq. Ruzica, maybe in 1 minute, briefly a bit about yourself, your background, and your involvement in this event.
Thank you, Hugo. This time you pronounced my name right, but the surname was wrong, but that's okay.
Always something.
So my name is Ruzica Pekic, known as Rose. I'm a founder of Proptiq, a startup where we build digital solutions around residential living, residential real estate, and we are also expanding into co-working space, so into commercial. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to share my experience from the founder side. Originally, I'm from Croatia, came to Germany 7 years ago to study finance. So my background is in investment banking, but in 2018/19, I started to think about founding a startup in real estate, since I was always living in the co-living concepts. So I was really happy with the concept, but not with the services and digitalization around it. And I think now it's a great time to be in the space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose. So moving further along, we have Marie-Luise Klose, who is Senior Manager Venture Development at Deutsche Bahn Digital Ventures. Hi, Marie-Louise.
Hi, everyone. Really happy to join this round today. My name is Marie. I work for the Corporate Venture Capital Bahn of Deutsche, the Corporate Venture Capital arm of Deutsche Bahn. We invest mainly in Series A and Series B rounds in startups that add strategic value to DB Group as a whole. I'm a founder myself. I have started beginning of the year a small consultancy firm for SME business to basically grow their own base of digital talent across Germany. Previously, I worked for Rocket Internet before I joined DB and for BMW. And I'm really excited for the conversation today.
Thank you very much for joining us. Next up, we have Shilpika, aka Shilps, who is head of strategic partnerships at Elucidate, a startup based in Berlin that is fighting financial crime. Hi, Shilps.
Hey, and thanks you have done the intro. I can leave the room. No, thank you. That was really good. So that's what I do today. I'm Shilps, born in India, and now I'm based in Berlin. I've been in Germany for about 2 years. Came here by the way of Spain, the UK, the US, and all over the place. In terms of my backdrop, it's a bit eccentric. I started my career in fintech, moved on to banking. So I worked for Deutsche in London. That's where we started to really interact with some of the people we'll talk about today, aka the venture fund capital allocators. Post that sort of banking life, went on to climate activism, which is very much a part of my life even today. So we can talk a bit about the future and how climate holds sort of very important place there. I've also worked in early stage venture capital in London, part of an initiative called Diversity VCs, which is very focused on getting very different people into the venture ecosystem, but also as a result, very different people funded in the venture ecosystem than today. When I came to Germany, I'm very happy to talk about the difference between the venture ecosystem in Germany and in the UK. The experience firsthand of raising a fund, of being a founder, and also now being an operator in an early stage venture bank firm. So lots of different angles, really excited to get into it. And this awesome panel, I'm super stoked. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for your intro. It's like, I feel like we're so looking forward to discuss and get to the panel. We're like race cars, just gearing up their engine. All right, last but not least, in terms of participants of the panel, we have Dr. Lauren Lentz, who is a founding partner at Revent.
Thank you, Hugo. Hi, everyone. Wonderful to be here today. I'm Lauren, originally from the US. I've been in Germany / let's call it geographic Europe, including the UK, since 2013. So also have kind of seen different worlds. As Hugo said, I'm one of the two founding partners of Revent. Revent is an early stage VC fund based in Berlin with an impact focus, meaning that we invest in early stage companies from pre-seed to Series A, where we think that by solving a large systemic problem related to, be it climate change, healthcare, empowerment, that these companies will then go on to become very large, very successful, and also have a significant positive impact on the planet and on society. So we are very much, I'm here representing the investor point of view. Before Revent, I worked for a family office doing also impact-focused early stage investments. But my background is actually primarily as a social scientist and was a couple of years at McKinsey in the US. Delighted to be here with everyone and can't wait to get into this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Lauren. And now maybe giving the mic over to those who made this study happen and with whom I have organized this event today. First of all, we have Karolina Yalamova, who is actually the head of the study and has been coordinating it, I think, for the past 2 years, Karolina, if I'm not wrong. So please.
Yeah, thank you, Hugo. Thank you so much for organizing this with us. Thank you for reaching out to us. So it's our pleasure to do this. So yes, I'm Karolina. I'm with EY for the last 3 years, based in Berlin. So I'm in strategy and transactions, which means we are supporting corporates and also venture capital funds with financing rounds and any transactions or any strategic issues that they need support on. And yes, I've been working with Thomas in EY startup team for the last 2 years and also coordinating the venture capital study, which we'll talk about today. So super excited to be here and super excited to moderate the panel. And thank you to all of you to willing to participate. So very psyched. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And now, last but not least, Dr. Thomas Prüfer. So Thomas is a partner at EY. He is also the one who's been leading the study into VC and startups in Germany, which has been published since 2014. And Thomas will now give us a little intro into the last edition of the study, the results, the main findings, and this will serve as the background of our discussion. So Thomas, over to you.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, and thank you very much, Hugo and the team, for making that happen here. So, brief introduction on my side. So, my name is Thomas. I'm a transaction services partner in Berlin. We have a pretty big team here in Berlin taking care of the startup / tech ecosystem, which means we are working a lot on funding rounds for the investors, be it PE investors, be it venture capital investors or corporate investors. We are also working a lot for the growth stage startups in terms of buy and build strategies. So we are pretty engaged in the ecosystem, and interestingly, I mean, we have a fast-growing team here in Berlin. So, I mean, thanks to the tech industry here in Berlin, not only in Berlin but in particular in Berlin, our team is one of the fastest growing teams in EY in Germany, which is pretty interesting. Yeah, when I compare that to my starting days in EY, which was back in 2007. I mean, actually, there was no industry in Berlin. And that changed significantly over the last 15 years, as you all know. So thank you very much for having this opportunity to discuss the topic here. And I would like to kick off the discussion by giving you some context and some background of the VC study. And I promise I will keep it very short, and I will not use a lot of numbers here. And I've also not presented fancy advisor slides. I would just like to give you a bit of context. So as Hugo mentioned at the beginning, we are doing this venture capital study already since 2014. And why we are doing this, so I mean, as I said, we are engaged in this ecosystem from a transaction point of view, from a business point of view, but we also wanted to look behind the scenes a little bit, and we also wanted to do our homework, because when we decided we want to be a partner for the ecosystem, we said, okay, we need to do some homework, right? So we need to understand where the funding is coming from. We need to understand what the current trends in the market are, who are the investors, who are the most funded startup companies, and that was the general idea to launch that study into the market. And actually, we have done that like a startup back in 2014. So we have done some research. We have invited a lot of market participants, like we have also done it in the last year, and discussed some ideas. And we pushed it out to the market, and we got some good feedback. And we said, that's apparently something the market likes. And let's continue to do that. And this is what we are doing since 2014. And I think as compared to other studies which are also in the market, we are always trying to look behind the scenes, behind the numbers. So what is really discussed in the market, behind the volumes of fundings and the number of funding rounds and things like that. And in the study, for instance, in 2019, we have looked at the impact investing topic. And we had some great discussions also with the Revent partner, where we have discussed that, and we invited a lot of partners in that discussion. And in the study 2020, which is the last study we have published beginning of this year, we have decided to look at diversity as a very general topic. And we have invited a lot of great female leaders who have helped us also to form an own point of view, and who have also helped us to make the study really, let's say, different from other studies you can see in the market. So what are the major results of the study? And very brief in terms of overall situation of the venture capital funding in Germany. I mean, as you all know, that developed pretty well. And what we can also see when we look back into 2020, I mean, we see that the startup tech market in Germany is pretty resilient in terms of Corona. So what we see when you look into the monthly development of the funding volumes and the number of fundings, that we had a hit in the ecosystem when we had the first lockdown in March and April. So the first half year of 20 was really impacted by Corona. But when we then look at the second half, and in particular also now at the beginning of 2021, we see really strong growth. We see growth which is even higher than the growth we had before Corona. So overall, the scheme and the tech ecosystem is really resilient in terms of Corona. What we still see in Germany is that we have a lack of growth investors, at least a lack of German growth investors. So we of course have all the growth investors coming from the UK, Asia, and US, and investing heavily in the German tech startup ecosystem. But what we are still missing is kind of really big German growth investors who can participate in C, D, E funding rounds. And what we can also see still in the German ecosystem is that we have a high share of foreign exits, and that is somehow also dependent on the lack of German growth investors. So in Germany, we see a lot of M&A transactions to foreign investors, and that is something which is really different compared to other ecosystems, because simply we don't have these TCVs and these index ventures and these other Sequoia and ventures like we have it in other ecosystems. So that's something we see over the last years. I think overall, we have high attractiveness of the German market, and the development is really great. So coming now to the topic of diversity. So as I said, I mean, we have this research on funding volumes, number of funding rounds, etc. And what we discussed in the team together with Karolina was, I mean, look, when we are doing transactions, we actually have two counterparts. We have our client, which is the investor, which is the growth venture capital fund, which is a PE fund. or a corporate, and we have the target side, which is normally a fast-growing company. And what we observed in the team and what we discussed heavily in the team was, look, I mean, we are only talking to men. Yeah? So it's really when we are talking to our clients on the investor side, we are talking to men. When we are talking to the C-level of these fast-growing companies, we are also talking to men. Of course, there are some exceptions, yeah, but generally we are talking to teams of men. And we said, yeah, that's really a structural issue, what we see in our daily business, and let's do some research, whether that's only a personal observation or whether that really can be supported by data. And of course, it can be supported by data. Yeah? And what we have seen in our research, and that's also supported by other research we have looked at, is that the share of female founders that increased over the last years a little bit. Yeah? So it was around 10 to 13% back in 2015, 5 years ago. It's now at around 16, maybe 70% in 2020. Yeah? So there is a minor growth over the last 5 years. But you all know that the tech ecosystem overall, yeah, that has a fast, much higher growth over the last 5 years. Yeah. So when you look at it in absolute numbers, really the growth we can see in terms of the share of female founders in Germany as compared to the overall growth of the tech ecosystem, that's really poor. Yeah. So and what we also said is, okay, let's go a step further. Yeah. So what does that really mean? And what is the, let's say, observation and experience also from female founders in the market? And the experience is that female-led startups have issues to raise external capital. Yeah? And the issues are, first of all, related to the fact whether or not to raise external capital. So female-led ventures are struggling more than male-led ventures to get external financing on board. And the issues then also come down to the volume of the financing rounds. Yeah? So there is research which is clear evidence, yeah, that the volume of funding rounds in male-led ventures is much higher than the volume of funding rounds in female-led ventures. And that finally turns to a situation that when you look at the financing structure of female-led ventures, yeah, you often see that female-led ventures are bootstrapped for a much longer time than male-led ventures. Yeah, so you often see that female-led ventures have friends and families as the first investors, as opposed to traditional venture capital funds, early stage professional venture capital funds in male-led ventures. And that at the end of the day leads to a situation that, of course, also the growth of female-led ventures is structurally limited as compared to male-led ventures, just because they get the venture capital investors on board much earlier than female-led ventures, and they are not struggling so much to get the right investors on board and to grow their business. And that was the reason for us to focus on this topic in our venture capital study and to invite great market participants like we have it right now. And I think that should be maybe the intro for the panel discussion. And I hand it over now to you, Hugo, maybe to raise the first questions and use a little bit the context maybe to trigger the discussion.
Happy to. Thank you very much for this. For setting the stage here. Maybe if we, in order to start, you mentioned several elements when it comes to the success factors, and especially when it comes to female founders raising capital. So maybe I would like to hear from the two VCs that we have on the panel. What are your opinions, and possibly what are your views on potential levers where action is possible here in order to bridge that funding gap for female founders?
I'm happy to start. So again, Lauren from Revent. I think when I think about the issue or this kind of structural problem, why are there relatively few teams with a female founder or that are co-founded? Why are so few dollars overall going to these female teams? I think it's important to keep the kind of broader picture in mind and kind of the ways in which a deal might come to a venture fund and basically the way in which the pipeline actually comes to a venture fund in the first place. So we're early stage, and like many early stage funds, we rely very heavily on network. We rely heavily on people who are known to be active angel investors. Many other funds have active scouting programs, etc. And we know from the research that when you rely on networks, networks are often very much representing or reflecting or mirroring the profile of the person themselves. So if you have a fund where you have primarily men, their networks overwhelmingly also tend to be male. The angel scene in much of Germany in particular is overwhelmingly male. Many of these scouting programs are overwhelmingly male. So what does that mean? That means that the people who are actually sourcing many of the very early stage deals are male. Their networks in turn happen to overwhelmingly be male. And so the deal flow that's being brought to many of these funds is already biased when it comes in the front door. There are for sure many companies out there which are more diverse with female founders, with more mixed teams that aren't actually ever being actively sourced. So then the onus is on the startup to then approach the fund. And we also know that when a team approaches the fund rather than being sourced or getting a warm introduction to the fund, that it's often much harder for them to get money from the venture fund. So I would say kind of one of the earliest parts of this whole cycle is already a problem, and it's actually already a lever when we want to start thinking about solutions, which is that we need more people broadly in the ecosystem who are angels, who are scouts, who are sourcing deals, who are part of these networks of the funds, so that the deal flow that is actually coming into the funds in the first place is much less biased, is more representative of the companies that are actually being founded out there, and so that the pipeline that is coming into the funds in the first place is already more mixed. There's a lot that can be done then on the side of the decision-making at the fund, but I think I'll stop there and let Marie-Luise also chime in a bit with her experience.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said, Lauren. I think reproducing networks are one of the key issues that we face here, and also this unconscious bias of just, having this image in mind that you allocate different resources and different capabilities to companies that are men-led. However, maybe adding a little bit of optimism here, what I also see and what really gets me excited, even though I think it's still not enough, is that there is now a certain level of awareness. I mean, if I think, for instance, about my time back at Rocket, that's like 5-6 years ago, I never heard any discussions whether there should be like a female person on the board or whether like the C-level of a startup should consist of a more diverse team. However, it now calls our attention as investors as well to see that the team is like diversely composed. I mean, I guess this is something that you have heard of all startup investors, that the team is now the key resource kind of, and it calls the attention, at least of us, in a positive way if the team does not consist only of white male. However, maybe to add a little bit of relevating this information a bit, obviously, like most pitch decks that we see and most introductions that we get are still this way. What I also observe and what I find very interesting is that more and more founders in our portfolio, they approach us very actively when they're hiring new C-level positions, for instance, and they try to leverage this network of finding also good talents, because the way the hiring process works is also very much biased still, but now there's this level of awareness to try to get new talents on board that kind of change the team atmosphere. Maybe one last point from my side to that. I think this is a very, very good development of having this awareness, and also the fact that we are now talking about this proves kind of the point. I also very much like the fact that now women themselves try to set up like stronger networks and really try to have this mindset of helping each other in the personal and professional growth and opening doors. So I get approached a lot over my professional as well as over my private network from other women, even seeking new positions or looking for investment or whatsoever. And I feel like there's a very positive network currently being created around that.
Thank you for sharing your insights. And maybe to get into the actual very tangible process of fundraising, I think, Rose, you've gone through it yourself, right? You've raised is it a pre-seed or a seed round recently?
It's pre-seed.
Yeah, right. So you've talked to investor. I mean, you're in the real estate branch, so you're like even more into a sort of male-dominated segment. So maybe like, can you share some of your experience, your perspective, and what was that experience like?
Of course. Thank you, Hugo. Thank you for raising this question. I think from the setup now in the call, only who is missing is a client. So then I would have the whole circle, and I would have the whole, the all inputs that I need to explain the process actually. So at the beginning, when we raised our pre-seed, I was lucky enough that I had that I had a male colleague. So we co-founded together. So this was never an issue in our case. And nevertheless, I think this is also the very good combination, because in a mixed teams, you have different angles of diversity. Yeah, this is something that I'm also going to point later. But for the pre-seed, this is also okay. Like, no one is questioning actually, is it a male or female founding team? But for the later stage, I think the client is the king. If you wanna raise a seed round, then you investors wanna see your client sales pipeline, and for this, it really depends in which industry you are, and if you are talking to female or male clients. And you can imagine, in my case, I'm in real estate industry, and it's really challenging if you're talking to male clients only as a female. But I think this is just the nature of the business, right? And the problem is only for the first meeting, and then afterwards, no one is asking this again, because they just, once they see you, once they hear you, once they talk to you, then everything is fine. But to have a foot in the door, I really think that you have to have the mixed team. So it really depends in which industry you're operating. And then if you go back to the investors and say, hey, this is my sales pipeline, these are my figures, they might raise the question about your team and how many people are in founding team. But I didn't see that. What I saw, and this was one-off experience that I'm never gonna forget. This was last year when I started raising funds before COVID. I talked to one investor who proposed to have this personality tests, and I was like, what's wrong with them? No, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with us? Like, why would they do so? And then because I was curious, I said, like, okay, of course, let's do this. And then the story behind this investor, he wanted to know who is behind the Proptiq, like, not only Luke and Rose as a co-founders, but what kind of personalities are there? Because he was very knowledgeable about the industry and also about the market in whole. So he wanted to see what kind of culture, personal management style, what is the risk profile of these people. So this was actually a very good experience, because for the first time I also discovered some stuff about my co-founder and vice versa. Because normally, let's say, if you're founding a startup, I would always advise you to go for mixed teams, and also to go for more diverse teams. Why? Coming from the investment banking side, they also talk about diversity, but it means something completely different, because once you get your foot in the door, you start behaving very similar to your colleagues. You go to the same restaurant, you have the same lifestyle, because otherwise you don't fit the crew, right? But here, it's completely different, because if you have double resources, then you're just wasting your money, right? To have a very good team, to have a very successful team, you have to have different personas behind this. And that's why I think that this personality test is something that should be done at the very beginning when you are co-founding your company. because in order to raise money, in order to build your product, in order to serve your clients, you have different type of personas. You don't have to have the same. I don't need two roses in the team. How you deal with these people, how the team is going to structure between themselves, this is another issue. This is something that you have to work on, because of course, if you have different risk profiles, if you have different people, of course, this is also a challenge itself. But for the fundraising, I think the most important thing is our numbers, especially for VCs and the clients. And for the clients, you just have to be smart. Just give them what they want, and then you can twist it and turn into your story. That's my experience.
Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, that sounds great. So now we've heard from the investor view and the startup founder view. So Shilps, if you want to get in to combine these both views, having been of both sides, and also as you mentioned, you worked a lot with finance and banks, fighting financial crimes. So maybe you can tell us how that is, being a woman in a men's world, I'll say.
Sure. Thank you, Caro. So I'm going to take a little bit of what everyone said and try to think about like the flywheel for change. So the flywheel for change, if you think about the different people who are in the funding landscape, you've got the LPs, so the folks like the pension funds, the government bodies who actually allocate money to funds, so traditional venture funds. And then you've got the traditional venture funds, you've got the GPs. The GPs then fund the founders. The founders then have clients. So Rose talked about that. And then you have what Thomas talked about. If we have more exits, we start to have a pool of these ex-operators, these people who worked as founders, funding new things. So I'm going to pick a hole on all of those cycles and why we're here and what needs to be fixed. And it can't be that Rose has to fix herself. I really hope not. I really hope that's not the future we're looking at. So if you look at the LP landscape and if you think about traditional asset managers, pension funds, who's allocating money is usually a stereotypical white man. And to Lauren's point, their networks and when they meet with funds is generally other white men. So if you are a first-time fund manager who's looking to raise money to invest and invest differently even, it's really hard to raise that money because these folks tend to pattern match. They tend to look at previous track records. So it's like egg or the chicken situation. So I've been in that situation, and that's a whole other session, but not for today. But if you can allocate money to people who look different, who in turn, as fund managers, will allocate money different, we already have a really structural problem. It's systemic. It starts at the very top there. Then let's say, even if you were getting funded and you gathered some money, and then you want to invest differently. Typically, and Lauren, to your point, what I want to say is I would really hope, and this is something I've seen in the UK doing more and more, that we don't rely on warm introductions to make investments. Like we really hope that, as fund managers, our job is to, produce outsized returns. And maybe we have themes and, we want to change the planet, we want to change outcomes for people. But ultimately, if we're looking at sourcing deals, if networks are where the blockage is, why are we still using our networks to invest in the best people and the best business models? So I think this is something that needs to be fixed in terms of how people source and invest. Now, let's just start. Say you were a founder, you got some money. Now, if the money is going to men in general, men tend to hire men, and there are some men who would hire women. But these women are not getting hired at senior positions. In Germany, if you look at the discrepancy in what women are getting paid, even in senior positions, is substantial. If women want to talk about ESOPs, and I've seen a founder do this in Germany, like for like, hiring two different people for the same position. This founder said, but I'm sure that woman talent, she's okay with not taking any stock, like any employee stock options. I said, how would you just assume that? How would you just assume someone is not willing to take the risk? And then, if you don't nurture that talent will leave. VC funds today, in the UK, this is a new story. They don't have a paternity leave policy. How are you going to nurture, even if you promoted like female talent, how would you nurture them? And the same kind of passes on to, so the cycle of, let's say, exclusion continues. If you don't have board members, female board members on your company's board, how are you going to make different points? How are you going to affect, even if you're a senior leadership person, how will you have a different outcome for the company, for how you nurture talent, for your policies? How will you attract these people? You don't want to be outbound always. People need to come to you sometimes, especially in talent situations, not really in the fun situation. And then I think to Thomas's point, if you, we haven't seen, we can talk a little bit about SPACs if you want, but it's really like an anomaly in Germany at this point. But if you don't see a lot of exits or path to exit, then how are you going to see folks like exit and try to invest differently? Angels, like people with some wealth they've made and they think about the world differently. So again, it's trying to figure out what can we, what are all the different aspects that are actually stakeholders that are to be held accountable, and there are tweaks to be made so the system flourishes. So no founder today or no fund manager, first-time fund manager, second-time fund manager has to feel like it's all on them, because it can't be fixed by one person alone. I just asked like my last point, which is, I really hope from today, like if we're standing here today, people start to look forward and what's the future that we want to build. There are some big problems facing us, climate being the biggest, really. And if you're not going to involve different stakeholders to build a radically different and cooler planet that we have today, that's on you and you're losing out. And that, I think, is the biggest opportunity. So if you take everything away and you just think of existential risk, that's what's important. So I think these are all these different parts of the chain and looking forward that need to be tweaked. And I'll stop there and kind of hand it over to you, Caro.
There's one question in it's the chat, but it's actually a colleague of ours who's like really into the topic. And so one argument that comes up is obviously the what we call the pipeline issue, right? So if you talk to a VC and then they say, hey, how come you don't invest in female-founded companies? I mean, the first thing I think that will come out is, there's only 10% of startups are female-founded. Hence, there's less likelihood that I can find a proper target in that segment. My investments will be a reflection of this whole pie, right? So what would you answer to a VC that says, I can't invest in more female founders, there's just not enough of them, hence a pipeline issue, meaning there should be more female founders out there? How about Lauren, you take this one?
Sure. I think Marie-Luise actually wanted to start, and so I'll let her have the first word, and then I will chime in.
Good.
Yeah, I don't mind, but let me maybe start. So I think the pipeline discussion is probably one of the most endless arguments that we hear all the time when it comes to hiring, when it comes to deal flow, when it comes to board positions and so on. And obviously there's kind of a true point to it. So it's a matter of fact that there are less female founders and so on. We cannot pretend it's not that way, but it's also a matter of awareness and of an active choice. And what I would expect from any investor or anyone out there who's hiring positions, who's investing in companies, who's like also building like a new base of leadership teams and so on, is to like actively face that, right? So we need to get away from this passive position of just laying back and saying like, look, I don't receive many pitch decks from women, but rather saying, okay, this is a fact that I'm aware of and I need to change it. So what we try to do within our fund is to like very actively engage in the networks that are out there. So networks like Global Digital Women, we support the network of Bitkom, trying to accelerate funding rounds for female founders. We're super active in Slack channels where women are looking for funding and so on. So it's a question if you just want to lay back and accept the status quo the way it is, or if you see it as an issue and want to change it. And I think, at least for me, that's the minimum you can expect from anyone. But Lauren, feel free to add what you do at Revent. I think you have an even stronger approach to that.
Yes, so we have a quota. And I would say a quota is a really good short-term forcing mechanism. It's a bridge, it's not the long-term solution. But I think what's very good about having a hard quota, about saying, okay, we want to have a minimum percentage of our investments go towards diverse teams, is that it means that this is always going to be a part of the conversation. And it means that, when we look at our deal flow, we say, look, our deal flow at the moment actually doesn't look very diverse. That it raises a discussion immediately to say, okay, so how can we go out and source more diverse deal flow? What can we do right now to actually change the inbound so that we're able to make different decisions. Quota is not a handicap. It's not a free pass. Every single company that we invest in, we fundamentally believe in. There's absolutely no kind of bonus points. But what the quota does is it's just a forcing mechanism to make sure that we are always looking to actively change the composition of our deal flow. And I think in general, so yes, there are fewer companies on average that are founded by women. But I mean, even as the report said, as we know from other sources, there actually are a lot of companies out there founded by women that just don't bubble up to the VCs because the women decide to bootstrap because they get the advice, perhaps the wrong advice, that it's not a good idea to go the VC route because they don't necessarily have enough mentorship, role models. Again, this idea of sort of systems reproducing themselves. So it's also a little bit of a lazy argument to say there just aren't enough female-founded companies. It's overwhelmingly male. To some extent, that's true, yes. But then the question is, how can we actually, by mentoring, by giving money to women angel investors, by having quotas, kind of what are the steps that we can take to actually change the composition and create the next generation of role models of female-led companies that exit, that create liquidity for more women to be in the ecosystem. These are how this becomes an exponential change and not just incremental.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Well, this is a nice question. I mean, what are the next steps? What can we do? How can we change the way deal flow works right now? So, Rose, maybe you can answer what would you prefer? I don't know, maybe you already talked to some female accelerators, or how was your financing going? And what would you prefer? Where do you think there might be some, you might need some help? And what would be the help, let's call it help, the help you require?
Thank you, Karolina. Yeah, I was just listening to you and I come up with something. Normally, I'm not wasting time on blaming the system. I'm Croatian. I know how to fight and how to work hard for stuff, and how to reach my goal. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. But listening to you guys, it actually opened up my perspective a little bit more. And what I think that could really help us as a female founders, if we would have more trust coming from VCs. The problem is that even though VCs see the legit business model, they see the market is there, they see the client's requests, they don't believe that either they don't know the market very well, or they know the market and that's why they say, okay, but I don't think you could close the deals because you are acting in a male-dominated industry. So it would be also helpful if we could have more support in this growth stage for the first few clients, because I have a choice now. Okay, am I gonna go to the VCs and raise for the rounds for the growth, or is it gonna be organic growth? Because I'm just tired of talking to investors who are like, okay, I want to see numbers. And in the real estate industry, you have this long sales cycles. So you start talking to your clients when they have 2-3 years to go before they start using your software. And in the meanwhile, you have to keep your marketing, you have to keep your work to expand, to make your brand even more presentable. But then you have the problem that you don't have enough money. So from the pre-seed to the seed, there is a gap, which I know I'm coming from finance. I know that for investors is really a high risk to invest when they don't have the numbers behind this. But maybe it's going to be much easier if investors, if they listen to us, and if they understand also business model a little bit more. Even though I know in real estate there was not so much going on over the last few years, and real estate operators, they were always very stubborn when it came to the innovation, because they were king on the markets. The demand was such high for their real estate. the discrepancy between the demand and supply side, it was so huge that they never had to lose any thought on this. But now after the COVID, digitalization became more and more popular, and not only popular, it's a must-have solution if you want to be competitive, because on one side you have hospitality, which is a hospitality sector which is turning into residential, and they have this serviced apartments kind of style already. So other traditional real estate operators, they have to keep up with the trend. So now it's better, but again, I still have some 6-12 months to go until I get first revenues. I think this could be a solution. I think it's not only real estate which has this problem, but before raising a seed financing round, I think also other industries have this. So maybe if investors if they get aware of this, I think this could help.
It's about everybody getting their fair shot, right? It's leveling the playing field. I want to zoom out a little bit and maybe look at the international perspective. Like we've heard, I think, we're all based in Germany. The report shows us the dynamics in Germany, but if we compare to another strong tech hub in Europe, for instance, I think Shilpika, I'll hand it off to you. You've had experience, working out of London. You've worked, you mentioned your organization, Diversity and VC, and so you have a whole different experience over there. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe the dynamics in the UK, which is very diverse, especially London, compared to maybe Berlin, where you're currently based, in terms of VC dynamics?
Sure. Can I, before that answers, I'd love to answer that question. One of the things I wanted to throw the grenade in there and say, Rose, for yourself and any other founder, the question we have to ask, and this is not taking less or taking an easier route, is venture the answer. Is that the kind of company you want to build, or anyone wants to build, right? Because in the current landscape, what's been really cool in terms of innovation is different models. So combination of debt, combination of revenue-based financing. There's a lot of really interesting models that are popping up that I think are really worth pursuing. And understanding if your business model, I imagine in a year's time, once you start to really pick up and you have recurring revenues and you have long-term contracts, why wouldn't you utilize that as a collateral against getting a really interesting debt profile? There are lots of fintechs popping up to service this space, because if you also look at the venture ecosystem, the performance of most venture funds leaves a lot to be desired, even though a lot of money is flooding in there. So I think it's just interesting to ask ourselves if that's a route you might, or anyone might want to go. Coming to the UK. So I've said this to Hugo before. When I came here from the UK about 2 years ago, I felt like I was back in 1999. So the maturity of conversations around diversity, around inclusion, around funding talent that looks different from what people know to be a pattern here, just felt like you were trying to move, you were trying to start this massive movement. You had to be out in the streets to even start to have a conversation. What has happened in the UK for sure over the last 5 to 10 years is if you are talking about funding differently, if you're talking about funding more fairly, it's not a new conversation. You don't have to at least unpack that thing, because here really the conversation when we're trying to raise a fund was, yeah, but what do you mean by diversity? What do you mean? What am I going to do? What do these people do? And I literally had someone tell me, this is very controversial, but is precisely the quote I got, is, yeah, but who's going to fund immigrants? But let's just let them be, and then they'll figure out once they're done with their whatever side shop business. And I said, so you're telling me that as someone who has probably going to have a child here or not, or have a generation, have a life here, I should wait and hope that someone will fix it? And you don't think I have the talent? I don't have the talent. Anybody else doesn't have the talent to fix the situation if they only had the money, if they were only funded. No, they need to go to school first. So that also kind of puts me a little bit off against coaching women more than men so that they can suddenly outperform. Women need the cash. Wire the check. This is the experiment I dare anyone to perform. I dare people. Take 100 founders, 50 men, 50 women, give them the same amount of cash, see what happens in 5 years. See what happens. Really, like we have statistics. So we don't have a lot of data for Germany, but for the UK and the US, women-led founding teams actually are likely to return twice as much in every dollar invested than all male teams. That's a fact. Women tend to nurture stronger, more resilient talent that can weather lots of storms, especially in the last year. Women build really fascinating businesses that actually do good for the planet. And we're not talking subsidizing performance. So in the UK, what I really like is there is an increasing number. It's a more mature ecosystem. In a more mature ecosystem means LPs to some extent, the pension funds, the British Business Bank to some extent are open to funding differently. The big funds are funding emerging fund managers. So the fund of fund model is risen in the last few years. There are more angels who have been out as a result of successful exits. So there is an ecosystem that has a level of maturity, which is probably yet to be seen in Germany. I do think that there are more. If you look at, there was a report that came out yesterday, the number of female partners at venture funds. There's a significant number in the UK. I think that number is growing in Germany, which is very hopeful because we have 2 of them here, and I think it's really awesome. So I think there's like a few different things, and we can go a lot into all the things that are wrong. But I think broadly that ecosystem approach is yet to be found here. But this ecosystem is also not as mature. So to Lauren's point, as we start to see more exits, I really hope that flow of capital, because ultimately it's a flow of capital, will land in different places. So yes, Lauren, I'm really excited to hear from you. And I know you wanted to say a little bit about some of the backstory as to why we're here.
Yeah, Shilps, thanks. I mean, super, super valuable. And I totally agree about your point, which is to say that, I mean, not every company that is formed necessarily should be venture funded. And there are many other models that are, and there are models that are going to be better depending on the profile of the business, absolutely, or maybe not venture funded yet. Maybe it's sort of best to find other kinds of financing and then demonstrate some traction so that you are kind of particularly attractive to VC funds. I mean, I just wanted to make maybe one point about this UK versus Germany question. Again, I come from the US. I would sort of liken the US to the UK in that the conversation is just much more advanced and has been for a long time. That doesn't necessarily mean that the outcomes are significantly better, although they are a little bit better, but that the conversation is just more developed, that everybody understands pretty instantaneously what you mean when you talk about diversity in venture and the startup ecosystem. But I do think it's important just to maybe say a word about why the ecosystem in Germany looks a certain way. And I think not all of this can be attributed to this, but certainly the roots of German startup system really are, can be traced to Rocket and to the kind of days of Rocket Internet, which had a very particular culture and attracted a very particular type of person, not only as evidenced by one of our panelists, and there are many examples of kind of diverse profiles who are at Rocket, but Rocket really seeded the ecosystem, right? And many of the people who kind of went through the school of Rocket then went on to start companies. Some of those companies exited, they had liquidity, they started the next company, they went and they started venture funds. And so the origin story to some extent of the ecosystem here looks pretty white and pretty male. And that's a bit different than it was in the UK and certainly a bit different than it was in the US. I'm not saying whether this is a good or bad thing. Certainly overall, the fact that an ecosystem has blossomed and has grown so quickly in Germany is overall, I think, a terrific thing. But that means that we now need to think about, given that this is where we started and given, as I talked about before, and many other panelists did, the way that these trends then actually are exponential and become systemic as people get liquidity, start funds, become angel investors, and this reproduces more and more. You need to think about how can you actually do something of a course correction. And maybe I will actually pause here and give somebody else the opportunity to chime into the discussion.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Lauren. And as an ex-Rocket, I can definitely say you're right with everything that you said. Maybe Shilps, to add one point to what you said and what I personally really like about it is that I still see that when a lot of founders, like especially female founders, talk to VCs, there are some partners who consider it some sort of creative act of helping them, and being like, I like to help women, I like to open doors for women, but it's not because they're convinced that it's the right talent and it's a perfect company, but rather as some sort of, being a guardian angel, opening doors and so on. And what you just said perfectly proves the point. This is not what we need. So we don't need people to like hold our hands and to be like very, as some sort of father helping you to open some doors. We need someone who's just purely and rationally convinced that this is like a very great team, a super good company, and that it's worth investing. And it shouldn't be something as greenwashing, where you just feel like I'm going to fund a few female companies because it makes me feel good and I'm convinced that this is a social impact matter. It's not. So it shouldn't be that kind of anger that we put towards the topic. And whenever I hear, especially like some male partners saying stuff like, I like to help women, I always feel like, gosh, you should not be helping them. You should just see the product and the company and so on. And as soon as you feel like they actually need your help, you already have kind of an issue. So I'm really glad you put this up.
Maybe one controversial point here. So because yesterday in the prep call, we talked about quotas, but isn't quota in a way a form of help, right? It's like tilting it back a little bit so that women get a step up. And would that, based on what you're saying, you don't want or need to be helped, but then, you're I believe for quotas, and just playing devil's advocate, but I'd love to hear you on that.
Lauren, I know you wanted to comment quickly on the last point, and then we can rage all the blaze like on this quota point, which I hope, will be very interesting to hear from everybody here.
Yeah, I'll just raise, I think I already shared my point of view on quotas, which is that I think it's an important forcing mechanism for changing the conversation, definitely not changing the outcome, and definitely not changing the standard. And I wanted to give one very small anecdotal piece of evidence, which is that, we talk to literally hundreds of teams a year, and we always do a kind of a scoring to keep things as quantitative as possible. And one of the scoring dimensions is around founder in particular. And we spoke to a founder today, female founder, and of the many, many hundreds of teams that we spoke to, and this is top of mind because this just happened immediately before the call, but she had the highest score of any founder we've spoken to. And again, this is one small piece of evidence, but I think if you look at our data, you'll see that there's, within our own deal flow, there's absolutely no difference between the overall quality scores that we give to male versus female founders. If anything, I would say that on average, many of the female founders we talk to are actually a tiny bit stronger because they've had to work that much harder to overcome that much more bias and to be that much more resourceful. And so the outcomes, they work harder. And by virtue of talking to us, they've already had to actually achieve quite a lot. I will turn it over. I can tell that there are other people looking to get in the conversation.
I would just say, I think there was a lot of backlash and some very constructive conversations when the decision came out. Like in January, it was that, for publicly listed companies, for every, if you have more than 3 or 4 partners, you need to have at least one woman on the board. And I know there's so many amazing female founders who fiercely defended it. And I totally see why. Power structures are not incentivized to dismantle themselves automatically. They're just not going to happen, right? Who's going to give power away? I wish I had that power. Like, I'm good, but that's not the case. So I think something needs to give to set that flywheel that Lauren, Marie-Luise, and Rosa also, Rose talked about, that this needs to be instigated. And sometimes that's all you need. You become what you see. You aspire for what you see. And if that doesn't exist, and these women are likely to invest in other women or different people, like women is one measure of diversity, and bring them up. And then we actually enrich the ecosystem. Because one last point I'll make, Germany is really benefiting from diaspora talent. People are coming from all over. There's incredible talent here. This is a once in a lifetime chance for people to fund incredible founders that may not be obvious or visible to them. I think there's a great case for innovation that Germany desperately needs for different business models. So I think this is a business case and a country improvement case, and on an EU level, not just Germany, to invest differently. And I think this is the right time to do it. So I'm really excited. And I think diaspora and people who are coming here to build their lives are bringing a wealth of talent. here. So it's about time.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, this is a perfect way to end it. I feel like it's really sad that we need to end it because we can go in so many directions, and I think the exchanges are super valuable. I think based on the feedback I got in our chat here, we could certainly do a part 2. I'm open for it. If you guys are up for it, we could certainly organize that and start getting even more controversial and go even deeper. So. I would like to thank everybody, all the panelists, for taking part. I would like also to thank EY, Karolina, and Thomas for your input here and for bringing us all together under the umbrella of this study. I think we're touching on some really interesting points, and it's not all doom and gloom. There are some cause for hope, and yeah, I think there's some great steps being taken by people around this table, really, to make a dent in the old patriarchy and really take things better. So yeah, we're past the hour. So again, thank you for taking part to all the panelists, and again to all of you who've been watching. Hope you found it interesting, and yeah, stay tuned for an upcoming format on the topic of diversity and female founders and VC. So thanks again, and wish everybody a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. It was great. Bye.